All right, so at the beginning of the 60-day series that we're doing right now, that we're almost over with, I made an icon animation that a lot of you guys like and that you wanted me to make a more in-depth tutorial on. So we're gonna do that in this video. I'm gonna be covering a couple of, let's call them animation techniques that you should know if you want to create any sort of icon animation in DaVinci Resolve Fusion. Now, the first thing that you need obviously is the icon that you're going to be animating. In this case, I got these icon from iconfinder.com, and it's a free royalty-free icon. So if you need some, you can go and check that website out. All right, so the first thing you need in here once you're in your Fusion composition is the actual SVG, right? You can also do a PNG, but ideally you want to have an SVG formatted icon. Okay, so let's start by importing our icon. For that, go to Fusion, import, and then find the SVG right here. And there, just locate the icon that you're gonna be using. After you click on it, you're gonna get this little box that tells you what size you want your icon to be. By default, I usually put these at 500 by 500. That way it's not too big or not too small, right? And it open it like here. Let me just get rid of this one right here. We're gonna start a new clean composition here on the side, just so that we can see things better. Okay, so here we have this icon and it will look like this. Now, what you want to do always is have another background node that is basically the same as your timeline resolution. That way, when we press 2 right here, we can see our icon in the whole timeline. Now, the first animation technique that you want to know is the simple scale intro animation. For that, what I like to do is I press Ctrl spacebar and add a transform node. That way we can also rename these, press F2, and here I'm going to rename these scale intro. That way you already know what animation is happening here. The other one that I have to the left here is already in the same name, so we're going to have to name the scale intro 1. It doesn't allow you to repeat the names. All right, so the first one is the scale intro animation, in which if we preview these like this, we can see there's a little bit of a scale and also the path of the circle. So those are the two first animations, but we're gonna focus on the scale first. For the scale, all you need is to go on the transform node, and then on the size you're gonna create a keyframe here. So we're gonna use 24 frames in this case. We're gonna add a 1 there. So that's the full size, and then go back to the beginning of your timeline or your composition and set this to 0. If you press play already, you can see that it creates a linear animation. Now, some people like to leave these like that first and create all the different animations. What I like to do sometimes is, what I usually like to do when I create any sort of animation is I already go to the spline tool right here and try to play around with the ease in and out. So I press F right here with them selected, and then T if this is not open. That way you can adjust the curves already, and then you can preview these at a little bit more realistic pace, I will call this, right? So if we press play, we can see that there. And that is our first animation. And we're gonna combine these with what I will call the path circle here. That if we look at our SVG, sometimes the way that they are built is by using masks that are subtracting from another mask, for example. So let me just get rid of this one right here. You can see that's a complete solid path, and that is just the way that the SVGs come from wherever they were built, or if you had built them. It really depends on how they were built, right? In this case, I had this little circle here that I wanted to have be a little bit not complete, because the second animation that we have was that rotation reveal. Let me just show you. So the second animation that we had here is this rotation reveal of the eye. And if the path, or if this circle was complete, like a complete circle, then we wouldn't really see the movement at all of this. That's why I added that little touch, so that we can see a little bit more movement on that initial circle. So to create that, the first thing that I actually did was I pressed 2 right here. I got rid of this path. Then I went to the second path. So here, take the solid out, and then we're gonna play with the border width, and we can increase or decrease the size so that it reaches that other one. Press Ctrl P to deactivate this one, and then holding both, we can see where the point reaches right there. That way we are basically in the same initial path, right? The reason why we took the solid out of this one is so that we have this length option right here. So what we're gonna do is go to frame 24, and I'm gonna leave this open like this, and I'm gonna create a keyframe right here. I'm gonna go all the way to the beginning, and I'm gonna set this to 0, and then also in the spline tool. Now, if it doesn't open right away, what you can do is select these and then reopen the spline tool. This little weird thing that happens sometimes. And then here you can press F and then T so that you can adjust the ease in and out values. And you can always use these manually if you want to. We have that animation right there. Now, one little thing that I also did on this scale animation was here at the frame 25, I added another keyframe. Actually, it was at 26, I think. So if you want to add a little bit of a jump, what you can do is add a second keyframe a few frames after that first one ends, and then add these little mountain, let's call these, and holding Control, you can move only this size. That way, it has a little bit of a jumpiness. If it is too much, it will look weird, so make sure to make these really subtle. That's all right. It's a bit too much still, but that's okay. Like that. So we have that there. So that's the first animation that we have. Now the next thing that you can do is check out SUALVI.com for some of my free assets for DaVinci Resolve. And you can also check out the split screens pack that I've just recently updated. Okay, now the next technique that you want to know is basically the path reveals. And in this case, we're going to be using a polygon to reveal this path right here. I don't want to have to deal with making the same process that I did for the circle because this shape is a little bit weird and more polished, let's say. So it will require a lot more work to make this look like that by just using one single path. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a polygon right here, hold shift so that it becomes in there. And then I'm going to draw these path around this eye section, and do not close these completely. So just bring these back so that they're both side by side. And if you don't want these to close automatically by selecting, when you select them, click right here on this insert and modify. That way you can select individual points and then you can move them like that, set them up like that. Then what I do is select everything and press Shift S, and now you can adjust these manually, holding Control, so that they are all fitting within this area. The reason why I'm trying to leave these to be vertical like that is so that when we create the mask, then the reveal actually looks a little bit better because we're going to be using a flat style of border, right? So I'm going to get rid of these here, get rid of the solid, but it's not going to be activated because we have not closed our path right here. Okay, now we're not really seeing anything yet because it's on the paint mode merge. What I want to do is set these to multiply. And now when we adjust the border width, we can see how the whole thing is being filled with our path that we have right here. So once the whole thing is filled, you can always play around to see if there's any parts missing and then make any little tweaks or adjustments that you need so that it keeps looking good, right? Then we have this here for the path. And I was talking about these little curves earlier because I want these to be like these basically. So the path doesn't look that weird. There it goes. So you can adjust these holding Control, as I said. That way we have our path animated there. And this is going to be the second animation that we're going to implement here. So we're going to start this at frame 25. So we're going to create a keyframe on the length at 0. And then we're going to go to frame 45 and then make this complete. And then before I actually adjust the spline tool, what I want to do is that second animation or that second movement that we have here, which is the rotation. So if we take a look at these, we have that movement. So for that, we're gonna add another transform right here, and we're gonna rename these rotation intro to, because we already have renamed these other one that we had earlier, right? Okay, now to make this work in the other one, we started this inverted. So I'm gonna set these to be 180 on the angle section. I'm gonna press the box here to create a little keyframe, and then we're gonna go to frame 45 and set these to 0. Now go to the spline tool and also make sure to select the polygon that we have here so that we can see and select all of the points and then adjust them all at the same time like this and adjust the curve. So let's take a look at these. There we have that there. Oh, and one last thing that I added here too was that I went to this path that we had initially created and I created a keyframe at 25. And then at 45, I brought the length all the way to 1. That way this circle closes. There we have that there. And you can also adjust the in and out values of these points right here by following the same process with the spline tool. There it goes. So that's how it looks right now. We have that there. Okay, so now the next technique that you want to know is the object fill, basically. If we take a look at these, we have a little bit of waviness filling here, right? But that is using a waviness. You don't have to do it. That's an optional step, but we're gonna do. But I'm gonna show you how to create that. And if you don't want to do the waviness part, you can just leave that out. So go into your SVG file here. We're gonna add background, and I'm gonna connect these to our merge node, and I'm gonna press Ctrl T so that this is the background. Now watch what happens when I press 2 on these. The whole thing goes black because when you add a new background right here, by default, it's going to be the same as your timeline resolution. Since I added these to the eye icon, which is basically 500 by 500, which we did at the beginning. So for any background that you add into your composition right here, you want to go to the image section and then auto resolution and set these to be the same as your SVG. That way things don't get messed up. Now, so that we don't see this background the whole time because it's already black, let me change the color so we can see the difference already. We can see that the whole background is filling up our composition basically. So what we want to do here is go to the path and we're going to connect these to our merge node. And then on this merge node, you can go to the settings and then choose multiply by mask. That way our background is only going to show up in this whole area that we have here, which is the mask, right? So then what we can do is add a little square or rectangle here to our background. And I'm going to make these wide so that it fits completely and make these a little bit taller. And then if we move this rectangle, we can see that the whole thing is basically filling up, right? The animation is filling up. There we have that there. Now, if you already like this, you could leave these like that already, right? It looks pretty cool too, like that. But what we did was we had this rectangle outside of our composition or of our eye right here. And that animation started here at, let me check this out, started at 45. So the third animation basically. So we're gonna go to frame 45 right here. And I'm going to create a center or a position keyframe. And then at frame 65, let's say, we can bring these up like that. If you want this to be slower, you can just increase the amount of frames that it takes from one point to the next one, right? Okay, now let me show you about the waviness node. If you press Ctrl and spacebar and add a waviness, if you hold Shift, it will add these as a background. It will add the rectangle as a background to this waviness node. Sometimes it adds it as a mask and we don't want that. So make sure to add these as a background and then this whole thing will be coming to this background as a mask basically. So press 2 on the waviness and nothing looks like nothing happens because our waviness type is set to vertical. So if you go to horizontal, you can see the waviness. Here you can adjust the strength and the scale, play around with it. And if we press on 2 on this background, we can see how that moves and fills the whole screen or the whole area, right? Now, what you can also do is animate the waviness at the same keyframes that you had animated the fill, so that it has a little bit more movement, right? So what you can do here is, let's say pace, we go from the default amount, and then at 65, we're just gonna move this a little bit, right? So that it moves at the same time. Let me go back and press 2 on this merge node, and let's take a look at how that looks. Looks like it's filling up like that, and the waviness adds a really cool effect that I like personally. Okay, press F on this spline tool, and then you can do that so that way it looks like that. Now, if it is too fast, as I mentioned, what you can do is select these and then just hold shift and move the keyframes like that. That way it will take a little bit longer, and you can also ease out these so that it takes a little bit longer to start, right? But feel free to play around with the spline tool until you get to something that you like. All right, now one little touch that I added here. Let's take a look at these. You can see these little punch. So what I will call this is a scale down punch that happens right here. You can see the eye becomes a little bit smaller. So if we go to this scale intro, usually if you want to keep things organized, you might want to add another transform node right here and then rename that scale down punch so that you know exactly where things are. But what I did was I added it in the same scale intro here, right? So let's use the method that I would recommend that you do, which is using another transform node, just to keep things organized. So let's call this scale down punch. Here we're gonna add a keyframe on our size, 45, and then what was the other keyframe? 60. Okay, 60. We made these 0.88. So it's a little bit smaller. So let's take a look at that. We have that there, but it's a really linear animation. If we want this to be the punch, right? So we have to go to the spline tool, press F, and then we can fit this to the screen, and then press T, and then basically increase the ease in and out. And then the punch is happening. If you want it to be really punchy, then you have to make these as high as you can, and you can always play around with the amount. Bring this a little bit higher, then it has a little bit of like a sort of like force. You know how you pull when you pull a bow, you have to go backwards, sort of like that. It comes a little bit closer to the screen and then it goes back. There we have that there. So that was the scale down punch. So that was technique. In my notes I have this number 5, but I've showed you a couple of things already, right? So maybe there's more or less. Now the last little technique that I wanted to show you was basically adding extra elements or adding more elements to your composition. If we take a look at these here, which is the ellipse, what I did was I made these sort of like wave or bubble pop-up happen right after the scale down punch, right? And it comes behind our eye. Here I have this polygon because I didn't like that this whole thing looked that way behind the eye. If you like these, you can leave it like that. But I added a little mask so that we don't see that there. So let me show you how to build that extra little touch. The first thing we're gonna need is a little background node. You can set these to be the same color as your fill or any other color. It's really up to you, even a gradient if you want. Then I'm gonna set these to be there as a background. Just make sure that it's coming behind your element or your icon. Then I'm going to add an ellipse, and I'm going to right click here on height, select expression, and connect the width. Connect these to the width. That way you only have to change or move one of them. Now to create a little bubble animation, the way that it works is, first of all, I'm going to make these a little bit of a soft edge, and then I'm going to take the solid out, and I'm going to make the border width a little bit bigger, like that maybe. So 0.04, like that. And then I'm going to bring the width to be really small, like that. Let me take a look at the keyframes where it started. So 40 to 65. So let's take a look at these. So let's go to your ellipse right here. And at frame 40, we're going to create the keyframe for the width. And then at 65, we're going to make these bigger like that. And then we're going to go to our border width at frame 40. And then at 65, we're going to make these small or negative. If you want to go negative, that's fine too. It's just not going to show up. If we take a look at these, we have that bubble happening right there. Right? You want to make these a little bit bigger, you can always play around with the different values. Now select everything, press F, and then play around with the ease in and out so that it looks pretty cool. There it goes. Now what you want to also take into account is that you want these to happen right when the punch is happening. So you're gonna have to adjust the positioning of these sometimes, probably, right? So you're always gonna have to be playing around, moving a few keyframes or adjusting the ease in and out of your elements when you're creating animations. Now, what I didn't like was that these things showed up right here. So to fix this, all we have to do is add a polygon, bring these to the merge node, and we can actually do this right here. And this one doesn't have to be perfect because nothing is really happening, right? Selecting everything, press Shift S, and then just make sure that any of the mask is not going like outside the edges of our shape or your icon. And then we're gonna invert these. And then let's see, it's a little bit big already. So we can also adjust the size right here. Just go to the ending point and it should be fine. I just got rid of that keyframe there. Okay. Now, and a thing that I noticed right here is that there was this little yellow thing, which is our rectangle. So go to 45 and make sure this one is a little bit further away. That way that little imperfection doesn't show up there. Okay, and now if we take a look, we have that animation and the wave happens after our shape has the little punch happening. The last thing that you want to do also is make sure that if you have a background or if you're going to be using a background, make sure that the colors are, I don't know if you could call these complementary, but that they don't overlap too much. That way you can still see everything or all the elements of your animation, right? And you can always go back here and change the color of these if you want to like a gray or white or yellow, any color that you like. You can always adjust those things. I would assume that you already know about that if you're watching this video. Okay, and one last thing that just came to mind that I forgot to write down was that you have to know also that you can always animate the actual path of the shape that you have here. So for example, we have this eye right here, the path. If you press here where it says right click here for shape animation, you can go here, let's say frame 80, and then we're gonna go frame 90. And if you move these like that, things are gonna move. The path is gonna move. Now, the reason why we're not seeing anything because we had chosen this one is that right here we have this polygon that we had used initially, right? So it's not really gonna be affected unless we make this border width a lot bigger. So if you want to animate that, you can always go and make this border width bigger like that. It's not gonna be affected too much. It's only gonna be affecting the area where you're moving, right? So if we take a look at this here, it doesn't reach that point yet. So we might want to make these even bigger. And we have that eye moving right there. So that was just a little example that I wanted to show that just came to mind right now that I had not previously wrote down, but something that you have to know that you can always adjust the path of the actual icon that you have, right? So let's make these. Then we have these sort of like me when I take off my glasses. I have to do that. Okay. So yeah, let's take a look at this whole thing and then we should be ready for this video. There we have that there. Now, some people might advise against it. Some people like this, but you can always add motion blur to your animations. And for that, all you have to do is go to the settings and then go to motion blurs and then you can activate that. If you have a lot of motion blurs, what you can do and you want to control all of them at the same time, you can always set this one to be your control. Let's call this motion control. And then using expressions, you can basically right click, set expression, hold control on this motion blur. And then basically you're gonna connect this motion blur to that motion control. That way, when you activate this motion blur control right here, the other one will activate too. So that is just a little extra tip. But I think I do have another video explaining how to connect things with expressions, so I'm not gonna cover that in this video. So yeah, that is it for this video. I hope that this video was in-depth enough and that you were able to learn how to create cool icon animations from watching this video. And come back tomorrow for the last day of the 60 days challenge. Bye.